Hey, it's Marcel. Before we kick off this episode, just a reminder that I have joined Substack. If you're not familiar with Substack, it's an online platform where you're going to find all my content, including my ink articles, discussion threads, audio clips, and videos. It's all there to enhance your leadership. It's also a great way to build community where you can post your comment, ask me questions, and share in the conversation. And one of the features of Substack may pique your interest. It's the green room. Let me explain. At the end of each episode now, we're going to continue the conversation in the green room over at Substack. The green room is where I ask my world-renowned guests questions you're not going to get anywhere else. And not just any questions, but topics that appeal to the everyday leader struggling to juggle priorities, motivate people, deal with conflict, etc. I'm going to put the link to my Substack in the show notes if you'd like to join us for more private conversation. So check it out after this episode. Click on the link and we'll see you over there. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Love in Action Podcast, the show that explores all the ways you can evolve into the best version of yourself as a leader. I'm your host, executive coach, speaker, and author, Marcel Schwantes. I believe that when we show up with our full humanity to work and lead from a place of love and care and inclusion, it will make a radical difference in your leadership, your business, and your bottom line. This is a show about love as a leadership and business strategy. Let's do this. Hey, glad you could join us. We are now in 160 countries around the world. I know that there are literally millions of podcasts out there, so I'm honored that you chose us today. So a few weeks ago, I had on the show Stanford neurosurgeon and neuroscientist Dr. Jim Doty. You remember that? And then right after that, I sat down with Dr. Roland McCready, the HeartMath Institute's director of research. And in those conversations, we had a great time geeking out on brain science and the connection between the brain and the heart. And in fact, how the heart actually has intelligence, right? It's not just a pump. And we learned that the heart sends more information to the brain than the other way around. I said we geeked out. I wasn't joking, but it was fun and enlightening. And so if you want to check that out a few weeks ago, I'm going to put that in my show notes for you to click on. So the reason that all that stuff is significant is because, well, it helps us in our decision-making, the connection between the brain and the heart. It helps us in how we lead others and how we treat others as well. So today, I'm going to sit down with another world-renowned person. He's a cardiologist. And we're going to talk about what he calls and I'm going to put the air quotes up, timeless traits of the heart. That'll make a lot more sense in a few minutes. And how these traits will help us to cultivate lasting joy. It's going to help us to master our stress and really help us to live with more vitality, right? Especially in the day and age that we're in now, so much polarization. So Dr. Jonathan Fisher is going to be our guest. He wrote a fascinating book called Just One Heart, a cardiologist's guide to healing, health, and happiness. Let me put that up for our YouTube listeners. That's what it looks like right there. So Dr. Jonathan Fisher is going to kind of give us some practical steps to the inner workings of I mentioned it, now he's going to talk about it as well, the mind-heart connection to help us, again, make the connections from the heart to being more of a healthy person, to be more of a kind person and having a joyful heart. So who is Dr. Jonathan Fisher? Let me tell a little bit about this guy, okay? He's a best-selling author, cardiologist, as I mentioned, certified mindfulness teacher, and well-being and resiliency leader for a team of 38,000. He's also the founder of Mind Heart Now, LLC. He delivers keynotes and workshops on mindfulness, stress mastery, total well-being, and heart-centered leadership. This is what we're all about here. For teams and organizations globally, including IBM, Bank of America, and so many, many others. Dr. Fisher lives in Charlotte, not too far from me, with his wife, Julie, their 3 teenage children, and 2 doodle dogs. That's the most important fact of all, Cosmo and Ugo. I think I pronounced that right. So don't forget, folks, at the end of this episode, we're going to continue the conversation over in the green room on my Substack platform. So I'm going to drop the link in the show notes for you to join us there for more private conversation. Dr. Fisher now joins us. Welcome to the show.
What an introduction, Marcel. This is great. Let's do that again and again. I'm feeling great. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We are for sure kindred spirits, and I think we're going to find out more connecting points as we talk. So, all right. So we start the show like this. You ready?
I'm ready.
What's your story?
Oh, wow. My story starts with my mom and dad, actually. Dad was the town doctor in a small suburban town in New Jersey, and his doctor's office was on the front floor of my house growing up. And so patients would, while the rest of us, and when I say the rest of us, I'm talking about 7 children. I'm the youngest of 7.
Wow.
The rest of us were upstairs or out at school. Patients were filing in and out the front door of our house into his office downstairs. And they were having lab tests and x-rays and stress tests. And then Dad would come up for lunch or come up for dinner, often late, frankly. He worked really hard. And at the same time, my story, starts with my mother. My mother was a bit of a rebel. She was born in the Great Depression in 1928. She worshiped, of all people, Albert Einstein. And when she was a teenage girl, she said, I want to be like Einstein. And everyone said, no, girls don't go into science. What are you thinking? Girls become teachers. And in our family, we only have enough money to spend one of you 2 children to medical school, and it's not going to be the girl. And my mom said, I don't like this approach, and we're going to do things differently. So she went on to become a nuclear physicist and a professor in quantum physics. And so that's where my story starts, with parents who loved each other, loved science, were committed to service and the greater good, and raised 7 children who all became physicians like our father.
Wow. Is she still alive?
She is not. She passed a few years ago, and a lot of what I put in this book, especially around the timelessness of the heart and the wisdom of the heart, is to honor her, because she was an amateur philosopher, and she had a stack of books at her bedside table that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with philosophy and humanity.
All right, let's start from the top. I'm always curious about what led people to a book. And I've heard so many different stories. So why this book? Why now?
In terms of why this book, I think I always was a collector of ideas. I'm more traditionally of an introvert. I'm the guy at the edge of the party, maybe watching everyone else, maybe with one other person, having thoughts about, well, what are they thinking? Why are they doing what they're doing? And frankly, when I suffered from severe anxiety, what are they judging me for? And so I really had this very active mind, and I was always taking notes. I had collected thousands of notes through my medical training, even as a teenager and in college. And it wasn't always easy being the scholar. People from the outside 20 years ago saw this guy who was at Harvard with the fancy crimson bow tie. This guy must have worked really hard to become a Harvard doctor. And he's probably got it all together. And Marcel, I spent so much emotional energy keeping on this facade of this perfect doctor who had all of his, pardon my French, all of his shit together. And it just wasn't true. It wasn't true. I was deeply worried about what mistakes I was going to make, what people would think about me. I was deeply sad because I had spent so much time pursuing success, as I then defined it, that I had isolated myself from others, from men, from women, from friends, even from my family. And so I lived 2 lives that were diverging further and further apart. There was the externally successful physician, and then there was the internal human who was suffering with anxiety and depression and eventually burnout. And part of my journey of healing over the last 20 years was learning to pay it forward. I learned that that's one of the best ways to work through our own suffering, is how can I take my lessons and help others so they don't have to go through the same thing and feel lonely, isolated, and hopeless. That's why I wrote the book.
And that's such a great segue to really the rest of the book. So let's just go ahead and dive in. And I'm curious about the title. Okay, so Just One Heart. I mean, talk about the significance of the title, because we only have one heart, and we have to learn to live with it and lead with it, right?
Yeah. Well, you know that, and that's part of your mission. And that's why when you said, "Would you like to talk?" I said, "Heck yeah." You're exactly the person who is already speaking this language. But if we're really looking at things, Marcel, most people don't view it that way today. If you have a physical heart problem, where do you go? You go to the physical heart doctor. If you have an emotional heart problem, you may go to a social worker, a psychologist. If you have a social heart problem, you have a broken heart because you have no friends, maybe you'll go to some community group. And then if you have a spiritual heart problem, you'll go to a priest or a rabbi or an imam. And we've become very fractured in our approach to human well-being and holistic health. And my message of the book is that if we are to heal individually, to become more effective in our lives, in our leadership, and if we are to heal the political and other divides in our society, fortunately, the solution is complicated, but it's really simple. We have to remember that our emotions affect our physical body. The mind-heart connection is essential. We can't expect that we're just going to exercise, eat right, and be healthy and run a multi-million-dollar business and not avoid having a heart attack from all the stress that we've been ignoring. That's just one heart within ourselves. Just one heart also means between you and me, Marcel. I go over the science of how what happens inside of my heart when you and I are together, whether it's in real life or remotely, virtually by Zoom. There are physical changes that are happening inside your body now that I have an influence over with how I show up, with my facial expressions, my tone of voice. And unless leaders honor the fact that we are not separate from each other, those around us are impacted directly. We have to remember we have just one heart. That's where healing happens.
That's fantastic. Okay, so many different rabbit holes I want to jump on. I think this is a good intro to the mind body connection. But before I do that, let me back up just a bit. Okay, you're a cardiologist. I don't know how many patients you've seen and diagnosed, and I mean hundreds, thousands. What would you say?
About 50,000.
Okay. That exceeded my total expectation of the number. But okay, so the reason I asked this question is because I wanted you to kind of give us an idea in the day and age that we are in now. How would you assess your patients' hearts in the world that we live in now? Like, what's the condition of the heart right now, generally speaking?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you there's two ways to approach it. One is the way that I was taught, and that medical students around the world are still being taught in the old-fashioned textbooks. I think that way is leading us towards sickness and not towards health, because it's so focused on the physical and it ignores the other dimensions. And then there's what I'm hoping, my mission is to get us talking about the heart and its health in a different way. And so I love that you asked that question. Very simply, if I was to assess, let's say you and I were together, Marcel, you're coming to see me in the office. Hey, doc, I want to live to be 100. I never want to have a heart attack. I want to have normal blood pressure, all the good stuff. What do? You've only got 2 minutes. First of all, I'd say thanks for the impossible task. And I would really simply, I'd start with the physical heart. And I'd say, are you doing the basics? Are you exercising, moving your body every day, a couple times a week? Are you eating a healthy diet, mostly plants, lots of veggies, lots of fiber? Are you avoiding the stuff we know that's not good for you, like smoking and drinking and certainly drugs? And then I'd move on to the other dimensions of the heart, the emotional, which we often ignore in the healthcare system. I'd say, hey, Marcel, how's your emotional life? What are the emotions you feel every day? Is it mostly joy and love and connection? Or are you feeling a lot of anger, frustration, resentment, confusion, uncertainty? Is that kind of your day-to-day? And then we would have a conversation about that. So we would take an audit of your emotional heart. Then I would move on. And then we're getting deeper and deeper here, right? The next we'd talk about, I'd say, Marcel, how's your social heart right now? I know you're busy, you've got the podcast, you're incredibly successful, you're on social media, all these people are looking to you. Talk to me about your best friend. Talk to me about your significant other or lack of significant other. Talk to me about your family. If I called them up right now, what would they say about the quality of your relationship? And I would go deep because these things matter. And then I would move to the deepest level with you. If I had 2 minutes, and I'd talk about the spiritual dimension of your heart, not in a religious way, not in a God way, but in a sense of, hey, Marcel, I have a feeling that you really are connected with something much, much bigger than you. Tell me what lights you up. Because without that sense of purpose and meaning in your life, if you're my patient, you are not taking care of all the dimensions of your heart that's going to lead to longevity and sustainability.
So physicians are not asking these specific questions because you just gave us the sort of the 4 dimensions of the heart.
Mm-hmm. In general, there is a trend now which I'm just a humble part of. I didn't write this book. I'm going to be honest. I didn't write this book. I researched it. I listened to what other people told me. I had more than 55 experts from around the world, including cardiologists, surgeons, neurosurgeons, spiritual leaders, and they helped me figure out how we can approach the heart in a new way. But yes, the answer to your question is the traditional medical education says that if you are a physical heart doctor, yeah, talk about stress, but leave all the other stuff outside. And the organizations are giving us no time to talk about it. So even if you wanted to, the average doctor would say, are you kidding me, Fisher? You're crazy. I've only got 15 minutes with a patient according to Medicare. Among those, only 7 are allowed to be face-to-face with the patient because of the computer interface, which separates the human connection. You're telling me in 7 minutes you're going to address all 4 dimensions of the heart? I say, absolutely. We've got to have a bit of a rebellion right now because this is how care has to happen.
Well, so now that puts us in the challenging position of having to manage those 4 dimensions ourselves, so that when we do talk to, hopefully never talk to, because I see talking to a cardiologist as maybe not exactly a good thing. If you have to face you, that means I'm having heart issues, right?
Yeah.
But if I can actually manage the heart through those 4 dimensions, as you said, physical, emotional, social, and spiritual, and live the kind of life and having the kind of proper balance that addresses those 4 areas.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh, this is life-changing for me.
Marcel, I don't know if you've heard, but by the year 2030, we're expecting a shortage of physicians in this country by between 100 and 120,000. And there have been a lot of suggested solutions to this on a public policy, governmental level, increasing the use of physicians' assistants and what's so-called mid-level providers, using AI. This is the hot topic right now. The reason I wrote this book is I don't want to see you, no offense, I don't want to see you in my clinic.
Yeah.
I don't want to wait, like you're saying, I don't want to wait till it gets that point. We have a sick care system that's reactive. It's not proactive. This is where the majority of our wasted dollars are going, towards reactive care spent too late, too little, often later in life, and often futile. And if we had spent a little more energy looking at the pillars of a healthy heart, we wouldn't end up in this situation.
Okay, so again, I explored this with Jim Doty. Please check out that episode if you can. But I want to hear it in your own words. Jim explained the connection between the mind and the heart. He didn't say mind, he said brain. So I want to hear it in your own words. What's the connection between the mind and the heart?
So it's a beautiful question, and Jim is a good friend. And if your listeners haven't already bought both of his books, Into the Magic Shop changed my life. Mind Magic is brilliant. So don't pause this, but make a note. Okay, read his books, and then maybe if you want, you can read mine afterwards. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'll say is that there's a distinction between the brain and the mind. There's a distinction between the brain and the mind. The brain is this 2-pound squishy flesh that's in our skull. the mind is something much, much different and bigger than that. The mind is the network of nerves that extend throughout our whole body, that are conveying 11 million bits of information every second back and forth from the brain to all parts of the body, including the heart. And it's a highway of information. That is the mind. And the mind also is the perception of the person in front of me. If I'm talking with you right now, in a strange way, my mind is partly made up of a model of what's Marcel thinking. Where's he going with this? So you are now, in my awareness, you're part of my mind. So that's just a little distinction that I find helpful. It's more than the brain, it's the mind. In terms of the heart, the physical heart is a miracle. It's incredibly strong. It's pumping 100,000 times a day, thousands of gallons without you even having to think about it, and often without you even saying thank you, and just saying, wow, that's awesome. At the same time, there's this electrical symphony that's happening underneath your level of awareness, beat to beat, second by second, that's being controlled and regulated by your mind. And in order for that to happen, the mind sends information to the heart based on internal and external environment. In order for the heart to then adapt, the heart sends information back to the brain in terms of how fast is it beating, how strong is it beating, how tightly constricted are the blood vessels, is there pain or discomfort, is there ease? All of that information is then fed back to the most ancient parts of your brain, the limbic system, which then feeds that information to the more recent parts of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, which then interprets the information and makes stories about your overall state of safety or danger. That's, in a 60-second nutshell, something that's incredibly complicated.
Is it safe to say that then the heart influences the mind?
Absolutely. The heart influences the mind in so many ways, not just in a physical way. There's the metaphorical heart, which is all of this. One of my key points and takeaways is that what people think as a metaphorical heart are emotions of anger, joy, sadness, and love. It is not a metaphor to say that that's part of your heart, because every emotion you feel in the workplace or at home has a direct impact on your heart's future health.
Okay, without us getting into the traits yet, I just want to explore what's going on with our hearts now, because we are in the middle of so many things that we don't want. A loneliness epidemic. Yeah. We have polarization where people are angry at each other, and I'm thinking, well, if you have chronic anger and hostility, of course it's going to affect your heart, right? Yeah. And then you got stress, especially job-related stress. So, I mean, connect the dots for us here about all those things and how the heart is in the middle of all that.
Well, we have a crisis. It's not just a public health crisis, but it's a humanity crisis right now. And there are lots of ways to look at it. We can look at the environment. We can look at politics, government, education, healthcare. I like to think about it just on a core human level. And first, we have a physical dimension of this crisis that's happening. Right now, 18 million people are dying every year of heart disease. 90% of those never needed to happen. They could have been prevented with straightforward measures if only we would invest money and attention and proper resources to prevention of physical heart disease. We wouldn't have to save people or work on it at the end of their lives. So that's number one, is the physical heart. Along that, we have an obesity epidemic. In case you haven't heard, 650 million people have obesity right now. Compare that to 50 years ago, it was negligible. The causes for that are complicated. It's beyond the scope of this conversation. Along those lines, diabetes goes hand in hand, and diabetes is one of the number one drivers of cardiovascular disease and death. We have an epidemic of obesity. What explains that, in addition to the nutritional factors? We're sedentary. We love our couches. We love Netflix. 27% of Americans don't get anything near the level of physical activity that's required to protect your heart. And being sedentary increases your risk of heart disease by like 60%. Wow. So that's the physical dimension of the heart. The crisis right now, the second dimension that's in crisis of our heart is our emotional heart. You can't open up a newspaper without seeing that we have a crisis among our teenagers and adults. 40 million Americans are suffering from anxiety today. That's more than a tenth of the population. 5 million of us have depression. If you're a leader in the workplace, do you know what the number one driver of disengagement is? Of lost work days? It's depression.
Wow.
And then we move on to the social heart, which you alluded to, which is loneliness. Our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, has the wisdom to have pointed that out in a Surgeon General's advisory. How crazy is that? Of all the medical conditions he could say is the most important, he pointed to loneliness. 60% of us are lonely and isolated, and that's as much of a risk to heart disease as smoking a half a pack of cigarettes. And then the last dimension of the heart that's in crisis right now is the spiritual dimension. And we know, according to Gallup and Pew and other surveys, that the level of both religious and spiritual observance is going down. And I can tell you, and I've got dozens of research papers to back it up, that people who don't have a sense of their core purpose and meaning and transcendent sense of belonging in their life beyond chasing the dollar and position, those people are at higher risk of dying young from heart disease.
Okay, that's a lot of doom and gloom. I want to now transition, but I want to make sure that it's the right time to transition to the 7 traits of the heart. Do we need to fill any gaps?
I like that question, and I like how you said doom and gloom. So I studied a little bit of marketing, okay? And I realized that if you want to sell someone on an idea, you don't give them the idea. You give them the problem that the idea is looking to solve, right? And the benefits of this new way of approaching. So the doom and gloom in this book is just chapter 1. I lay out in much more detail what's happening in the workplace, burnout, what's driving it, and all of that. There's one gap that needs to be filled for us to understand the 7 traits. And that's this new way of thinking about our emotional lives as leaders, as men, as women, anyone in this space of business. Unless we start to become experts in how emotions actually work, I don't just mean, taking a online course or reading one book. We have to understand very deeply how human emotions drive behavior and drive health. Otherwise, we can't possibly lead a healthy workplace. We can lead a workplace, but we can't lead a healthy workplace that improves our sustainable growth and profits. So to fill in that gap, I simplify understanding emotions based on how they affect our physical body. And there's 2 broad categories. Okay. In the 1970s, something very strange happened in Japan. Somebody showed up to the emergency room having a heart attack, and they found no blockages in his heart. But his heart was changing. It was weakening as they were watching. They went and looked. There was no blockage to explain it. They realized that this happened because 100 miles away, there had been an earthquake. And he heard about the news and was suffering from worry and grief about the tragedy. And this was the first ever description of what's called the broken heart syndrome, where you can literally have a broken heart from your emotional state if you're not aware. And so I'm not a down guy, I'm an up guy, I'm an optimist, and I want to provide hope. And so first I said, well, is this the only emotion? Is it grief and shock? And it turns out it's not. There are 8 heartbreaking emotions, which are around stress, anxiety, panic, depression, loneliness, grief, anger, and hostility. So I talk about all those. And then that's kind of where the scientific literature stopped about 10 years ago in the world of mind-body science. And so I said, that's not good enough. We're starting to realize that in the same way that certain emotions that you feel day to day can have a negative impact on your physical body and well-being, there are actually emotional states that if you become very skilled, you can create those emotions in your life every day. And if you do that, you're not only going to avoid harm, but you're going to cause protection of your heart itself. And these are what I termed the heart wakers. And these include generosity, optimism, gratitude, kindness, compassion, purpose, and love. And if we can create those. So I needed to at least set that up to tee up the rest of the conversation.
Yeah. Okay. So then, speaking of hope, we are going to give you a lot of hope because these traits is what could be the path. Is this true? The path to healing? Because it's in your subtitle, I think. And it's the path to healing, health, and happiness.
Absolutely. I spent 3 months before I came up with the subtitle, and I had a lot of conversations with my social media community around the world, and I finally realized that I was trying to do something bigger than one book. I wanted to write what many people said was 3 books in one. It is a book about healing, people who've had traumas, and I have people reading the book who are about to go into open heart surgery and other heart surgeries and in healing. It's also about health, which literally comes from the root word health, which means wholeness. So I talk a lot about what does that mean to be whole. And then for me, in my journey through anxiety, depression, and burnout, I didn't just want to avoid being sick. I wanted to live a good life. I wanted to be effective as a husband and a father, and then eventually now as a leader in a healthcare system. I couldn't do that by just running away from the things I no longer wanted. I had to discover what I was running towards, and that was happiness, joy, and fulfillment.
That's awesome. Okay, so I want you to actually touch on those 7 traits, and then for the sake of time, let's drill down on a couple of them.
Yeah. At a very high level, I spent a year researching these before I put them out there. I didn't make these up. We can put them in air quotes, and that's appropriate because you're not going to find a scientific paper, except for one that I write, saying that these are the only 7. I like the number 7. I'm one of 7 children. But the way they came up is I reviewed 3,000 years of wisdom traditions from whether it's Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism. I also looked at a lot of other spiritual traditions, traditional Chinese medicine, yoga, Ayurveda, and I looked at it from a very specific lens. Every single one of those traditions, and you can check it, talks about the central role of the human heart. And so I wanted to see, well, what are the common factors and virtues that they all have in common? And then I took that theory and I brought it to 55 international experts in mind-body medicine and spirituality, and I asked them, without telling them, I said, well, what are the traits of the heart? When you think about a heart-centered leader, what are you talking about? Because Marcel, you and I both see people around the world talking about, well, you should lead from the heart and live from the heart. I just wanted to know as a scientist, what the heck does that even mean? So that's where the traits come from. At a very high level, there are 7 traits, and they are in a very, very specific order. I'm tired of people saying you should lead from your heart and just be loving all the time. I think that's BS. I think it's BS not because it's the most important thing, but because it's inaccessible to most people living a stressful modern life. We've got so much stress that it's not even helpful for me to tell someone, you should just be more loving and caring, Marcia. Come on. I don't find that to be helpful. So at least in my own journey, I needed to go through a series of steps to get to that ultimate timeless trait of the heart, which is warm-heartedness. So in a high level, the first trait is steadiness. We have to steady our hearts in all ways. We have to steady our bodies. We have to deal with stress. We have to calm ourselves because in the workplace and at home, calm people calm people. And stressed people stress people. That's steadiness. The second trait is wisdom. This is just to honor my mother, Rosalie. I miss her. She was wise. And I wanted to understand this concept of what does wisdom even mean? So I dove deep. I explored many, many definitions of wisdom. And what I realized is that the heart itself has a wisdom to it, if we only learn how to listen. And I go into how to do that. The third trait is open-heartedness. The best and brightest and most inspiring leaders that I know have this in common. They are open-hearted, they're giving and generous. What does it mean to be open-hearted? It's not just to share with others, it's also to let others into your heart, not close them off. The fourth trait is wholeness. Brené Brown spent a whole book about it. I just spent 1 chapter. Because if you think about these 7 traits as climbing a mountain, wholeness is really the peak of the mountain. Can we Can we learn what it means to be fully present? Can we learn what it means to integrate all of our past, our pain, our feelings of brokenness? And can we heal them so that when I come into a group or one-on-one, I'm showing up all the way? And this is about mindfulness. It's about healing our past wounds. It's about the shadow self and the darker parts. It's about loving all the parts. And then the last three, we're kind of on our way, kind of down the mountain, moving forward. It's the most important, I would say, is courage. You can't do any of this without courage in this world. And the cool part about it is that the word courage literally comes from the Latin root, cor, which means heart. Courage does come from the heart, and I spend a lot of time talking about how people who are lacking courage can develop it, and what social scientists have said about that and psychologists. The next to last one is, I hate people who are serious all the time. No, I shouldn't say that. I don't hate them. But if I have a choice between two leaders that I get to work with, and one of them is serious and intense and frankly a little bit scary, and the other one has just a glimmer of that spark in their eye and a smile on their face, can you guess which one I'm going to want to be near? The one that has a lightness. So I explore, if we're somebody who maybe isn't naturally upbeat, and I was told, one of the worst things I was ever told by someone else was, Jonathan, you used to be lighthearted and you're not anymore. This was when I was at my lowest point. And that hurt a lot to hear.
Yeah.
And so I had to dig deep and figure out, well, how do I get that spark back? That's what lightheartedness is about. It's about rediscovering our joy, purpose, and meaning. And then the whole purpose of the book, if someone doesn't like to read, they can skip to chapter 12. Chapter 12 is the point of it all, and it's the seventh and most important trait of the heart. And that is, how can I be warm-hearted in a cold world? Which means, how can I become an expert in the science of empathy, compassion, and love, and then deploy that towards myself, towards everyone around me? Everything gets better.
Well, you've kind of let the cat out of the bag there with the last one being the most important one, but I'm curious from a leadership standpoint, because we still are a business leadership podcast, which one of those would you say is most pertinent to the role of a leader?
I wrote the final chapter of the book, chapter 13, specifically for leadership.
Yeah.
And it's about the heart at work. And I interviewed a dozen leaders that I admire, from Jim Doty, a neurosurgeon who worked with the Dalai Lama to bring the study of compassion to Stanford University and then around the world. I worked with Tom Mayer, who was in the command room for 9/11 when it happened, the terrorist attacks, as the medical director, and is the medical director of the NFL Players Association. I interviewed Robert Pearl, the CEO of the country's largest healthcare system for 19 years, Kaiser Permanente. I interviewed Claude Silver, who works at a VaynerMedia, a modern media company, who's their chief heart officer. I was desperate to know how the best leaders deploy these traits at work. And so I love that you asked that question. That's kind of the pinnacle here. The best leaders who deploy these timeless traits lead from the heart. The most important one is the last one. It's warmth. If you look at Bob Chapman, who was the CEO of Barry Wehmiller Company, which was on the verge of bankruptcy, and he turned it around again and again and again, he'll tell you he had one secret. Treat everyone that works with you as if they're somebody's child. Treat them with love.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Claude Silver and Bob Chapman. They were, I believe, guests number 4 and 6 on the podcast years ago. And I mean, if you haven't picked up Bob's book yet, that is an all-time classic. And so, yeah, thanks for dropping those names for sure. Claude Silver, Chief Heart Officer of VaynerMedia. She embodies everything that you're talking about as far as living out these traits at work. Follow her on LinkedIn, and it just comes out in every post.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So you, and by the way, you end with towards the back of the book after you mention these people how you can foster a lot of what you're talking about, those 7 traits. And so I just wanted to shed some light on that. That this is also a practical book, right? So and a lot of those I could relate to. I mean, I was looking at openly sharing ideas as part of being open, and and I advise my coaching clients all the time to open up by brainstorming sessions to the whole team rather than reserving it to those at the top of the org chart. Bring out people's creativity, which then extends joy. At least that's how I see it.
Yes.
All right.
Absolutely. The hope for the book was, it was not, I had a decision early on to make 2 years ago when I started researching this. I could either write a scientific book about the mind-heart connection, because I had a library of 1,000 articles I had read about all of the stuff we're talking about. And I could have done that and just made it on the medical textbook. And I decided that that would not have helped me when I was down and depressed and confused and hopeless. And it certainly wouldn't help people around the world that I was trying to help understand these things. So I wrote it in very plain language. And the entire book is focused on actions that people can take. So every chapter that we just talked about, it ends, half of the chapter are, okay, well, what do I do today? And so I love that you're asking that question. The simple, I would say, 3-minute version. What can someone do who doesn't want to go through understand all the science? They just want to put it into action today. The first step is steadiness. So it's just ask yourself, have I been living with ease in the last few months, or have I been kind of stressed most of the time? And if the answer is the second one, there's some simple techniques to steady the mind and steady the body. The body comes first. So we can use simple breath techniques. We can steady the mind by learning very basic, what's called cognitive reframing, which are mental techniques to approach challenges in a new way. And then we move on. We say, okay, maybe I'm struggling because I don't have clarity in my life. Maybe I need some wisdom now. Well, what does that mean, to have wisdom in your leadership? Wisdom means taking a broader perspective than you currently are taking. What haven't I seen? Have I really stepped back to look at way far in the past in my industry to see where we came from? Have I took a moment to imagine how far in the future I can imagine where are we going so I can see around the corners? Have I gone beyond my own idea that I'm the smartest person in the room? I redefine wisdom as collective wisdom. Have I brought in the wisdom of everyone in my agency and my company? And then we move on. What else can we do? How can we develop openness, an open heart? Well, we start by asking, have I been honest with myself?
Yeah.
With the pain that I've been through? Or have I been hiding it behind alcohol, behind drugs, behind other addictions and habits? And so openness means beginning a journey of opening to ourselves and eventually getting to a point where we can start to really listen to others better, whether it's our wife, our husband, our children. When they ask us a question or they ask us for our time, are we really being open with our hearts and generous? Or are we back on our phones and back to thinking about business? Wholeness, how can I live with a more whole heart? Very simple, practice mindfulness. Practice a little meditation each day. There's nothing better to help you get out of this belief that I am my own thoughts. I am every feeling that happens, that's who I am. Mindfulness helps us step outside and to become more fully present with this moment and the person in front of us. What about courage? Here's what you can do to develop courage. You can stop and go beyond why you're doing what you're doing today and ask, what's my bigger purpose here? What is my conviction? What do I believe so strongly that no matter what business brings, I'm going to stay with it and I'm going to have the grit and determination? So that would be the practice. And then in terms of lightness, you could find a funny YouTube video. Get into the habit of sharing text messages with friends, even if they may send you too many. Also, try and look on the lighter side of life. Try and be generous. Look for ways to be kind. And then the last one is warmth. Warmth is something that I'm committed the next half of my life, however long I have, is to bring more warmth into my own heart and to share it with other people. That's my mission. Help people live and lead with warmer hearts. And the way that people can do that, often, in my experience working with leaders, we are often so harsh with ourselves, that's the way we were taught, that it spills over and it affects others negatively, and we don't know it until people tell us. So it begins by examining the way we speak to ourselves and treat ourselves, and we begin by treating ourselves with love and kindness as if we were a smaller child version of ourselves or someone that we cared about.
Wow, Jonathan, we as we wind down here, we have a traditional question, but you've probably answered it about 25 different ways. And that's the how to lead with love question. I mean, assuming that I'm in an optimal state of the heart, right? I'm not suffering. Because then it's just cliche and platitudes, right? Oh yeah, how do you lead with love? No, I'm talking about practical ways that is going to impact your team, your organization, your company. Okay, so of everything we talked about, is there one to float to the top about how to lead with love?
Yeah, we haven't talked about it yet.
Okay.
No, we haven't talked about it yet. I've seen thousands of patients get sick and die. I've seen more than that get better and heal through horrific heart situations and others. And the key ingredient into their healing, and I go into the science, is actually love. And I don't mean that in some woo-woo mystical sense. There are changes in the body that happen when we experience love and when we give love. And my point is, if it's good enough for a heart doctor who has patients living and dying, isn't that same practice good enough for a leader who wants to have a successful business? How? The first step is to realize that we don't really understand what love is. You ask the average person, what does it mean to love? It means, oh, I care about you so much. I have all these feelings, I feel so warm inside. Yeah, that's not love. That is not love. That's the experience of love, but that is not the action of love. So the first step is to recognize that love has two parts. There's the experience and the mushy-gushy feelings. Fine, that's great to drive the more important, which is how do we turn that into action? And then before we rush into some action to do something for another that we think is a loving act, the first step is to listen deeply with your heart. And we don't do that enough. We don't do that enough. Doctors don't do it enough. Leaders don't do it enough. If you really want to love someone and show them that you love them and you're leading with love, you don't start by acting. You start by asking gentle, warm questions and listening as deeply as you can, and then reflecting back to the person, showing exactly how deeply you've heard them, especially around their pain and discomfort and their desires.
Well, close us out your way. What's that one thing we can take with us?
I always bring back my sister, Andrea, who was my best friend. She was the one who, when I was struggling and didn't know if I had a future in medicine or even in the world, what my future would be, and I had depression and I was afraid to ask for help, Andrea saw that and she said, Jonathan, can you just be kind to yourself? And that little message has always stuck with me. Because I still find myself, if I'm in a hard situation, if there's stress, if I'm not sure what decision to make, if I can just pause and be a little kinder and gentler towards myself and treat myself with just some ease and lightness, there's this amazing spillover effect that everyone else around me can feel. So my final message is to be kind to yourself.
I love it. The book, again, is called Just One Heart, A Cardiologist's Guide to Healing, Health, and Vitality. Jonathan, if people want to connect with you, learn more about you, where can they go?
I'm a LinkedIn guy, so you can find me on LinkedIn, also Instagram, and my book is available on Amazon. Just Google Just One Heart, and you will find it. I'm also on YouTube, but Just One Heart, and I'd love to have a conversation. As you can tell, if you couldn't, this stuff fires me up, Marcel, just like you, and so I'm just so happy that you invited me to talk about it.
Yeah, likewise. It's been fun. So we're going to keep the conversation going over at Substack. The link to it is in the show notes. I'm going to ask Dr. Fisher questions about how to handle conflict and difficult conversations in the workplace. A lot more practical, everyday stuff. I want to ask you about, balancing the demands of achieving goals while ensuring employee well-being and engagement, so things like that. So head on over there right now And hey, it's been real. So we're going to wrap up here right now. Guys, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you over at Substack.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, the future of leadership is love in action. Believe it, practice it, and watch your leadership and business flourish.